Carrie Geren Scoggins Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. On the topic of Obama set to turn Internet control over to the international community, that of the United Nations. Obama is attempting to turn our Internet control over to the international community. Very little information has been given to the American public concerning exactly who is involved in the international community that would be seizing control of our Internet. This is among the bad ideas that have come from the Obama administration. So far, we've seen unconstitutional executive orders, getting around legislative process where Obama just decides to enact unconstitutional laws without going through legislative process. We have also seen his attempt at indefinite detainment, allowing for an individual to be held indefinitely without ever having been placed under arrest or charged with a crime, being placed in detainment without an actual charge placed against them and without a court hearing. That one would see in what they used to call a banana republic, a third world tyrannical Marxist state under a Führer. We've seen more of this type of activity from Obama in his recent attempts to bring in media moderators to censor the media, and when threats of lawsuits immediately appeared from groups such as the American Center for Law and Justice and other civil rights groups, Obama withdrew his attempt to do so. Obama also wanted the FCC to illegally shut down all non-corporations in media, to censor out the little guys and target the Christian religious right media to be shut down permanently. So if Obama had had it his way, it would only be large corporations in media, limited. And there would be government censors brought in to make sure that nothing was said in these media outlets that were going to be allowed that would oppose the Democratic Party platform or what Obama wanted. Limited media and media censorship. More of what one would see in a Marxist state, not in a free republic like the United States government. Moving on, this type of activity has permeated the Democratic Party and the Obama administration. We've seen this all the way back to the Clinton era. The Marxist leftist agenda to override our Constitution and throw out our constitutional civil rights. There's a reason that they do not oppose the international community made up of communist countries, Marxists, Islamic groups, Islamic leaders, the World Council of Churches, which is mostly New Age and Islamic groups, which violates our separation of church and state. They seem to not oppose what goes on in the United Nations because they're just as leftist Marxist as the UN. The United Nations' so-called constitution is just like that of a communist nation, very vague and left arbitrary to the moment. The UN's constitution has no confirmed freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, a right to the jury of one's peers, not only does the United Nations not have a jury by one's peers, they also do not have appellate courts. They have the final say. They make up the laws and they enforce them. And they do not allow the media in. So there is no accountability for their actions to anyone. There's no balance of powers in the United Nations. That our founding fathers here in the United States held so dear. There's no responsibility to the people via the media because they do not have a freedom of the press, and the media is not allowed in to their court system. They're not held accountable to anyone. We've seen many unconstitutional acts by our United States laws in the United Nations. Not just the fact that they have a World Council of Churches that is now mostly Islam among New Agers and have notably become an anti-Christian entity. That would not be allowed in the United States to be part of our governing body. We have a separation of church and state that does not allow for an entity such as the World Council of Churches to become intertwined with our government, a theocracy. Adding to that the United Nations does not have a separation of church and state in the manner of stopping a theocracy, keeping the church out of the state, they also do not have laws keeping the state out of the church, bringing in Bible censorship, such as their hate speech laws and their anti-blaspheming laws, where if anyone speaks against Islam, the Quran, or Muhammad, they can be arrested, and in some cases, given the death penalty. This, of course, violates our freedom of speech and First Amendment rights in the United States, but also our separation of church and state, in that the state cannot condemn a religious tenant, and they cannot stop the free religious debate between religions. When the hate speech laws were overturned in the United States, the Federal Supreme Court upheld our legal rights to debate the issue. That includes debating Islam. We stand to lose the freedoms that we hold most dear, that the Federal Supreme Court has upheld for the United States citizens from our Constitution, the legal right to adhere to core values, such as Romans chapter 1 in the King James Bible, and the legal right to put that out on the internet without being arrested for hate speech. The legal right for ministers and preachers to stand up and preach an uncensored Bible. What our founding fathers fought and died for is at stake on our internet. For Christians to preach from an uncensored Bible, where we don't have a UN or state-approved Bible that we're allowed to teach from on the internet. Obama does not represent the United States Constitution. He's shown that in not just the executive orders, but in his attempts to bring in media moderators to censor the media, and in his attempts to bring in hate speech laws to censor the Bible scriptures on homosexuality. And we see this yet again, that he doesn't care to turn the control of our internet over to an entity such as the United Nations, or the, quote, international community, which is nothing more than a group of communist countries that do not have constitutional civil rights such as the United States has, and they abhor our freedom. They will be quick to take our freedom from us. This is yet another attempt by the Democrats and the Obama administration to allow extreme leftism to come in and squelch out our constitutional civil rights here in the United States. Remember that the Marxism that the Obama administration and the Democratic Party support is not limited to Karl Marx's book Das Kapital, the cherry-picked quote Obama used in his campaign of redistribution of the wealth. It extends into other areas of government such as media censorship, biblical censorship, ending the legal right to debate issues topics they do not want covered, censoring out opposing viewpoints, all the way down to the Obamagate and the abuse of a public office, where the Democrats and the Obama administration have already admitted to an admission of guilt of using government offices to go after those that oppose them, such as the IRS and the NSA, now being sued for violating the civil rights of the Tea Party, the Republicans, and the Christian religious right, where Rand Paul is bringing a class action suit against the National Security Agency, representing over 100 million people having their civil rights violated by the National Security Agency. And the American Center for Law and Justice, the ACLJ, Jay Sekulow, representing over 42 groups of Tea Party members, Republicans, and Christian religious right that have had their civil rights violated by Democrats such as Obama, and going all the way back to the Clintons, through their abuse of a public office and using government agencies to stalk down and harass their opposition or anyone that speaks out against them. So we've seen the Marxism they're capable of. How much worse would it be if now it was actually handed over into the Marxist governments themselves to police our internet? Those who are not politically active and have not been speaking out against the intent to bring in Marxism through the Democratic Party and Obama need now to step out and start getting politically active, letter writing, calling the media, and speaking out. Call your representatives. Demand Congress intervene in Obama's attempts to give our internet control over to these Marxist nations. The United States cannot afford to lose their freedom of speech on the internet, their constitutional civil rights being taken from them. They accredited the United States for invention of the internet. And who better to police it than the nation that has been the only in history to stand up for full freedom of speech straight across the board from any perspective and full freedom of religion, standing on the principles of what the United States founding fathers believed in, and the freedom of religion, the freedom of press, the freedom of speech, the legal right to debate the issues, the legal right of the individual as opposed to the Marxist collective good. Our founding fathers did not want us to have to answer to a board or bureau telling us what we are allowed to say, telling us what we are allowed to read or print, telling us what kind of press that we can and cannot have, who has freedom of speech rights and who does not, and what's going to be censored this week. Marxism was based on working for the collective good, having a board or bureau decide for everybody else what they will be allowed to say, what they will be allowed to do, where they will be allowed to work, what they will be allowed to put out in print, what they're allowed to preach and teach, not just publicly but privately in their homes to their children. Whatever they deem for the immediate collective good. Thomas Jefferson supported the opposite, which is the legal right of the individual to choose for themselves what is good. Freedom straight across the board, politically, concerning religion, or any other issue up for debate. Without censorship from all opinions and all opposing viewpoints, all political perspectives, on opposite ends of the spectrum, straight across the board, without censorship. As sad as it is, in the United States, our children are not being taught freedom of speech straight across the board, not just for the Democrat liberal end, but for the Christian religious right and for those that oppose the mainstream viewpoints. Marxism has so permeated our culture that our children were taught lies that they could censor out what someone else says and call it hate or hate speech because it opposed their viewpoint. They really thought they could bring in Bible scripture censorship, that they could go through and censor out Romans chapter 1 because it did not condone homosexuality, because our children were not taught freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Would they even realize that their freedoms were being impeded if our internet control was given over to total Marxists? by all means, write into the media, call into the media, write your legislators, and call in personally, and remind them that the United Nations does not have a guaranteed constitutional freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, no jury by the peers, no balance of powers, no media allowed into the court system, no appellate courts, and that these individuals do not need control over our internet, nor the ability to come in and arrest us when we violate their laws, which again are not United States laws, where we should not succumb to censorship that goes against our form of government. Remind our liberal Democrat media that they should fear censorship. Up until this point, they've not spoke out against the hate speech laws because they're such liberal Christian-hating Democrats that they didn't care to see the Christians lose their civil rights. And when they overturned the hate speech laws as unconstitutional and upheld the Christians' legal right to debate the issue, which included that of Romans chapter 1, you didn't hear any of the media coming out and saying that this was a win for the United States Constitution. And they're not going to concerning the United Nations stepping in and bringing in that same attempt at censorship and Bible censorship if they now control our internet. Remind the Democrat liberal Christian haters in our media the old adage, you are not a libertarian until you support the legal rights of those that you despise. Even if they hate the Christians, they should step out of their little lamestream world and start supporting other people's civil rights as well. It has to be freedom straight across the board, not just for liberal Democrats, but for the Christian religious right and what they call the Bible thumpers. They have civil rights too, and the freedom of speech is their constitutional civil right that shouldn't be handed over to be squandered by Marxist countries stepping in and taking control of the internet, going against our basic fundamentals as a nation. Our United States.
This has been another edition of Carrie Geren Scoggins Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. Look for more information, Carrie Geren Scoggins Political Newsletter and Carrie Geren Scoggins Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition, Facebook pages and bloggers.